Terence Crawford sets the terms for Teofimo to land a shot with himself. He says basically, yo, if you want a shot at me, you got to get past my old work. Israel Madrimov, the most recent 154-pound champion that Terence Crawford fought. Crawford is basically saying that Teo must get through him beforehand before earning, a shot at Crawford. Beat him first, Terence Crawford set surprise terms for Teofimo Lopez to secure the fight. Now, ego thoughts. I'm going to be real with you. A lot of the things that Bud Crawford does, like moves, some of them I just don't understand and they're questionable to me. And I've already talked about it, the whole bad business Bud. I mean, he's 37 now and he's saying it's the Terence Crawford era. Like, I don't know how that's going to work. How is it your era if you haven't, like, to this point, you had some good wins, you have accolades, but you haven't really crossed over and turned over as a star, and you're 37 years old. Guys like Oscar De La Hoya were probably just a hair younger than that when they were retiring and they had better resumes, right? So Crawford, with the resume he has, with the moves he makes, I don't really see how he turns into this star. I found the Israel Madrimov fight was cool. It was all right. It wasn't the best fight I've ever seen. It wasn't terrible. It was a technical fight. But both guys, especially early, no one wanted to take monstrous chances. They respected each other and what they brought to the table. So it was a real cautious affair from both people in them early goings. So for me, I don't see how Crawford can erase all that and, it's his era and he's now all of a sudden a pay-per-view star. Him and Teofimo are going back and forth online right now, which is cool. And this is what I'm talking about with the bad business Bud. Teofimo, win, lose, or draw, he's in exciting fights for the most part, and he does have a brand. So when I was seeing the back and forth, I thought Crawford would be all over this. But the fact that he tells Teofimo Lopez to fight somebody else first to get a fight with me, it's just bizarre because it's like Crawford totally doesn't get it. The things that would make him a crossover, because he already has the ingredient of being a great fighter, but not all great fighters are great businessmen. No different than Michael Jordan being the greatest basketball player of all time, but it doesn't mean he's a great owner of a basketball team. And that's what I'm seeing with Terence Crawford. If I was Crawford, I would be all over this. Teofimo is having legal issues, made a video about that with Top Rank. So he might get cleared up. He might get out of his contract. We have to see how it plays out. But it looks like from sources that I have, it looks like that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to, somehow get out of his contract. Maybe goes to Matchroom or something like that. So this seems like an alley-oop type of fight. And then you have Crawford telling Teo, who's talking crazy and talking spicy, he's telling him to go fight Madrimov, a guy that he just beat. I mean, super bizarre stuff for me. Because whether you like it or don't like it, this would be a nice fight with a good name. And the two clearly have some level of history now. There was a Canelo fight with Berlanga where they were in the crowd and Bud was pointing at him and touching him and said, I'll beat you. I'll beat your daddy. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Teo and his dad at least know how to sell a fight. Plus, they've made controversial comments like ESPN can keep the blacks. Teofimo's hit or miss. Yes, he's not of the weight class, but he's big size-wise. He didn't, like, when he was face-to-face with Crawford, he didn't look dwarfed by Terence Crawford or anything. And if you're at this stage where you're saying it's the Crawford era, I feel like this is like an easy fight. Like, we seen Manny Pacquiao later in his career, first fight with PBC, he fought Adrian Broner. It's kind of that type of thing. Yes, there was other higher risk fight, like for Pacquiao, Errol Spence or something, but he fought a guy with a big name, a guy who's not necessarily the biggest guy either in Broner, who came from the lighter weight classes, and it did what it did. So these are the moves that Crawford seems to have almost like a weird approach towards or attitude towards, like Jaron Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, Teofimo Lopez. These are all good fights, and you're only looking at Canelo, it appears, or that's the main fight you're wanting is Canelo. But I feel like Boots, Jaron Ennis, and Bud, Virgil Ortiz, who just beat Boachuk in a tough fight, or Teofimo, these would be ringing bells like, oh, I can make a lot of money in this fight. And the cold part about it is your boy Ego, especially over Teofimo Lopez, out of all the names I just said, I give Crawford I think he beats Teofimo. Let's not beat around the bush. But the fact that you're deferring him to a guy you beat is just bizarre. And then Crawford went on social media and basically said, let's talk, basically challenged him to a spar. Why does Crawford want to street fight people, spar with people? But this guy is talking crazy. He may become a free agent. It's a good fight in terms of the two don't like each other. So backstory, and you're just pawning him off to Madrimov. And he's saying Crawford, he's getting old. Crawford, he gets hit. He always fights guys with handicap. Tio's talking spicy. Tio's talking greasy. And to me, again, I would favor Bud easily. Not like it's an easy fight, but I'm saying I don't even have to think. It's not like a prediction like, oh, where I go back and forth. I clearly think Bud would beat Teofimo Lopez. So it's just shocking that Terence Crawford seems disinterested in some of these fights where you can at least fight a guy with the brand and make some money. And since he's annoying you and you're in the same profession, you can get some retaliation. So I really don't understand at age 37 how Crawford's calling it the Crawford era. But then there's lucrative fights, at least from a branding perspective. You could say, oh, Jaron's not ready, Virgil Ortiz is not ready, Teofimo will get blasted. It's up to Crawford to show that and prove it. And it's like, how do you make the time for a fight with David Avocado? Somehow, some way that makes sense to you. But Ennis, Teofimo, and Virgil Ortiz, guys like that, which are kind of ready-made fights. Outside of Teofimo, we have to see what happens with him legally. But the other two are with DAZN. You fought on DAZN your last fight. I just feel like these are no-brainer fights that Crawford should at least be exploring. And finally, the hypocrisy from the Bud Buddies is crazy. Terence Crawford, without having done anything at 160 or 168, wants to move up and fight Canelo Alvarez at 168. But then you got guys underneath you like Jaron Ennis at 47 and a 140-pounder who wants to do the same thing, move up. In Teofimo's case, it's the same concept. A guy moving from 140 to 154 to fight Terence Crawford. Now, a lot of fans are saying Crawford will beat his ass. Cool. Then why not do it? But then the Bud Buddies in the same breath will say, oh, why waste time with Teofimo Lopez? It's not worth it. But you have your Lord and Savior Crawford, who is trying to move up 2 weight classes to fight Canelo. And there's a lot of people, including myself, who believe that that particular fight is a stretch. Canelo's never been stopped, never been dropped. That's a stretch. So I'm just being real, and call me crazy. I don't care. Crawford versus Teofimo, despite the fact that I just told you I would definitely favor Crawford to beat Teofimo, to me, that's kind of a closer, more realistic match than Crawford moving up 2 weight classes to 68, right? It's not that Crawford's not a good fighter, but he was chinny in the Gamboa fight and other fights, and you're talking about fighting Canelo at 168, who has an iron chin, right? So I think the gap from where Teofimo, because Teofimo, somehow, some way, you got to give him his credit, he shows up the better the name. Like if it's a Lomachenko, if it's a Josh Taylor, that's some of his best performances. It's the guys that you don't expect, Sandor Martin, Pedro Campa, and Cambosis, guys like that, where you think it should be a walk in the park for Teo. Those are the guys that either beat him or give him a run for his money. So I cannot understand why Crawford doesn't take this easy work. Like, he rather spar. That's what I'm saying. Crawford, bad business bud. The business decisions are very weird. I don't know a boxing fan that would hold it against you at this point, given the trash talk from Teofimo Lopez, if you just say, hey, I got to shut this guy up. You guys just got to forgive me that I'm not fighting the true 154 pounder, because we're from the old school. A lot of us don't start none, won't be none. Teo is asking for this, talking greasy, and you're telling them to fight Madrimov first. Why? David Avocado didn't have to go through no obstacle course to get you. And again, to me at least, maybe I'm crazy, but Teofimo brand-wise represents a bigger fight than David Avanesian, right? So I don't understand, like, why you're not pursuing this more. See if Turkey will do it, you know? Say, hey, da-da-da. You've had top-ranked cards or guys on Turkey's cards. You had Jared Big Baby Anderson. So I know my take's going to be different than some people. I don't really understand the whole, for a 37-year-old, the time is not on your side as a pro fighter either. You're telling a guy to detour and fight a guy you just beat in Madrimov to prove his worth. But again, the hypocrisy is the Bud Buddies. They're not saying that for Crawford. They're not saying beat David Morrell, beat David Benavidez to show us something at 168. They're not saying, you know, go fight Diego Pacheco to prove your worth. They're saying Crawford should just go straight to Canelo 2 divisions up. But then the thought of Teofimo doing it, they're like, nah. And they're just, the Bud Buddies are more content saying that Crawford will crush and destroy Teofimo. And this particular matchup, one thing that does have me curious is it came out of nowhere. So I am actually curious for this fight. I would pay for this fight because I'm curious why Teofimo Jr. and Sr. have opted for a fight that looks so, on paper, it looks like this would be disastrous for Teofimo. But to me, maybe they really see something that they think. Now, I understand thinking is different than doing and executing, but I feel like they really think they see something or know something about Terence Crawford, which is why they're pursuing him that crazy. Because Teo's not doing this to Jaron Ennis, and he closer in weight. He talking crazy to Crawford. So I don't know what he knows or if there is something, because Teo, he spent a lot of time in Vegas gyms and he's been on the boxing scene. A lot of people talk. So maybe he knows something that the public hasn't seen or hasn't seen much of about Crawford, because he seems insanely, almost to a point of people looking at Teofimo like he's deluded and delusional. He keep talking about fighting and beating Crawford, and he's old. So I'm actually curious about this fight because I want to see what does he know and how it would actually play out. So the fact that Crawford is like, fight this guy first to prove you're ready for me, just kind of a weird move. Crawford's at a point where belts and all that, that's cool, but you should be trying to get the big marquee fights and the big money fights, the biggest money you can get. To me, Teofimo, you have to put him in the list. Jaron Ennis, Virgil Ortiz. There's no guarantee you get Canelo. So to push off options that to me seem like fights you could market seems a bit redundant.